Okay, morning everybody. We're just waiting for the door to be shut. Gonna wait a couple more minutes in case anybody else wants to jump on. We have very little attendees coming on today, so we want to make sure that we get a chance to give some people to participate. And then we'll start. Probably it is 8 o'clock, I think, right now. So we'll start probably just in like a minute or two. Do you have the ability to see the questions on yours?
Yeah.
Okay, in case they ask any questions. All right, cool. All right. We're gonna hear some radio silence for about a minute, unless you just want to hear mine and Adam's banter. Our witty repartee.
Did you come up with the 4 words?
I came up with 4 words.
Okay.
My 4 words are good. Okay. And you're gonna see I want to see how quick you pick up on what the trend is and who's on. I want to say, where's Chris Martin?
We have specific questions for him.
Yes. If you have supermarket questions, ask Chris Martin. He has a very good memo relating to the retail industry and revenue recognition. Were you involved in that preparation?
Yeah.
It was a very good memo, really good memo. So, okay, it's around almost 8:02, so we'll get started now. Good morning. Welcome to our third and final installation of revenue recognition. I'm Brad Muniz. I'm a partner here at Sobel Company, and joining me, as has for the past 2 presentations, is Adam Berger.
Hello. I am audit supervisor at Sobel Co.
And I'll say at the outset that Adam is pretty much has been the author of these presentations and slides. Adam has led our task force on revenue recognition, which included us looking over the different aspects of 606 and the impacts as to different industries. We would, confidentially talk about certain client situations and how it would impact and how we can best advise companies or clients to adopt the pronouncement and just give as much guidance as possible to the individuals within the organization to be able to advise the clients and companies as effectively as possible. So Adam, thank you very much for leading that charge. This is not a easy pronouncement that you decided to raise your hand and take. There are a lot looser ones. And the outset, what happened? Let me see. Here we go. I have to give the disclaimer that the views and statements expressed herein are our own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Sobel & Company. Today, we're going to cover a few topics. If you recall, we started, this is, as I said, our 3rd session. The first session covered the guidance, an overall view of the guidance that came out. The second session covered the second component, and now we'll cover the 5th component as it relates to it. And you'll understand in a minute or two what I said, or a few minutes, when I say the 5th component. Included in this presentation today, we'll talk again about an overview of 606, the concept of control, overtime and point in time. We'll go over some examples, which the only thing I really like about the examples, to be honest with you, is I like to argue with you about them. No, the reason I say argue in jest, in reality, I do enjoy the examples because it allows us to discuss them and give our viewpoints on them and different ways you can look at them, but it shows the complexity of these. And you've pushed back on me many times.
You have to have like a million assumptions, and you have to go in with, you have to basically know what contract is, and what our examples might not necessarily match what exactly a company or organization does. So
I agree. Now, this is, I said, our 3rd session. It's our 3rd hour of a session, and I had mentioned in one of the previous presentations that I know Adam and I attended a 16-hour session, 2 days of 8 hours each. Since then, I've attended probably over the past year, probably another 8 hours on this. And just last week, I sat through another 4 hours, 2 hours on auditing 606 and a 2-hour roundtable on the implementation effects of it. And as best as I could, I still, have a lot to learn about it. So these 3 hours, while I appreciate people sitting in and listening, including Joe in our office, and being interested in this, there's a lot more information that's out there, and that you probably should, look into a much more in-depth seminar. And if you could find one, if you're in a particular industry, Chris, I don't know if there's one for supermarkets, but if there is one for a particular industry, i.e. technology or construction, I strongly recommend, if that affects you, that you look into it. So moving on, we've gone through this slide before, but I do like to reiterate this over and over and over, because this is really the jumping point for the whole pronouncement. And as the title of the slide indicates, it's a core principle behind 606. In essence, revenue must be recognized when promised goods or services are transferred to the customer. Is there a key word you want to throw in there, Adam?
Control.
Oh, okay. Is that minor word that
Yeah.
really is not important here, huh? Yeah, Adam will talk about that in a little bit. He has a very big passion about that. And in an amount that reflects the consideration the company expects to be entitled to in exchange for those goods or services. Both these concepts, control and ultimately the amount you expect to receive, has not changed from previous pronouncements. I think that 606 just really refined and focused more on the control aspect. And as I said, Adam will talk about that more in the upcoming slide. And the amount you expect to receive, that's been out there for a while. You always had to consider rights of return, collectability issues, not just about accounts receivable, if you ultimately expect to collect it. So that's been there. I was going through a peer review, and the peer reviewee based his whole revenue recognition on the fact that, well, the client got paid for it, so I guess it was a good receive or a good sale, and didn't take into consideration, this is pre-606, but didn't take into any consideration revenue recognition aspects. It was purely based on, well, they received the money, that's what they knew they were going to collect. So anyway, then of course he wasn't accurate with his assumption. So continuing on, what 606 really did bring out and really synthesize was that there's 5 steps as it relates to the revenue recognition process. And this is the big, I found the biggest change amongst other weird things, but within the pronouncement, is it changed our discussion process as it relates to revenue recognition. And Adam and I and a couple of other people, when we're sitting around the office, we could be talking about a lot better things, but we'll talk about revenue recognition, and we're literally referring to the 5 steps, and we will talk about, what step you're hung up on, and go on about the particular aspect. And the 5 steps real quick are: first, identify the contract with the customer, which you and I sat through a seminar where they'll just give you something extremely esoteric. As contracts, what defines a contract? And what do you say?
It's basically any verbal or written agreement between 2 parties that state the terms of the terms. So like, when is it going to be shipped, the price, and all that stuff. And apparently it has to be signed by both parties, which is something kind of asinine to me. But to me, if both parties are enacting, they're basically approving the contract.
Yeah, and you and I sat through that seminar and we just stared at each other, because you just said oral, so that can't be signed, right? I read Chris's memo on the retail industry where it's point of sale and there's no contract there. Maybe if they're signing the credit card receipt, there's a signature. But I guess if there's an instance where both parties have to execute the contract for it to be binding, if one party does not, then there you don't have a contract. And you remember in that instance, they performed the service, everything was done, but the contract wasn't signed until after year end, so therefore there wasn't a contract, the person said. So yes, you're gonna have some wacky things pop up like that potentially, but hopefully it's very limited. And I hope stuff like that isn't material to the situation. The second step is identify the separate performance obligations. As I said, a lot of things haven't changed. They just really straightened things out. In the past, these were called the deliverables. Adam hates it because I still refer to them as deliverables, and I'll forget the word performance obligations. And every time I use the word deliverables, he rolls his eyes, as he did just now. But identify the separate performance obligations. That's what we went over in our last session, is how many different performance obligations are you required to be providing. Determine the transaction price, which on the surface sounds very simple. What is the contract amount? But if there can be, and you have to consider if there are variables. The fourth phase is allocate the transaction price to the separate performance obligations, and then the last step is recognize the revenue when an entity satisfies the performance obligations. So we went through steps. We did the overall presentation, then we provided a presentation on step 2, and now we're providing step 5. Why did we do that? Because Adam and I, when we were sitting around one day, we discussed this, and we thought the most controversial areas of discussion we had found have been in steps 2 and 5. So for that reason, we wanted to provide content as it related directly to those 2 areas. We're happy to have more discussions, do a presentation on other areas if people wanted, but those are 2 we felt that were most significant. There are some areas that are scoped out of 606. I won't read through all of them, but the leases, topics 840 and 842. 842 is the new lease standard that's out. It was supposed to be effective next year. I don't think a new ASU has come out deferring the effective date, but I think that's just imminent for private companies. But that is scoped out of revenue. Insurance contracts, and you see some other financial instruments. Now there's one down there, topic 958, nonprofit entities. Is that all nonprofit entities, or all nonprofit aspects are scoped out of this, or?
No, so there are some parts of it. So if you receive a contribution from a donor or a government entity, basically if the funds are received to serve the general public, then it would be scoped out of 606. However, if there's a identified party receiving a service from a nonprofit, then it would be included in 606.
Okay, interesting. I know that 2 people in our organization, Tara and Kristen, provided a presentation to a group on the nonprofit update, including revenue recognition. I got to be honest. I mean, I did an A&A update right before them, and I sat there listening to their presentation. My mind was blown. I thought 606 was tough enough. Start listening to nonprofit aspects and exchange.
Yeah, exchange, non-exchange, restricted, unrestricted, and conditional and unconditional.
And you said the words restricted. Is that with donor restrictions?
Yeah, with donor. Yeah.
So if you are involved in nonprofit aspects, I strongly recommend you look into sessions related specifically to nonprofits. They are particular as to their accounting aspects, and we have a good amount of people here that can help you with that area. Okay, the effective date for public companies, public businesses, business entities was effective December 15, 2017. Don't get yourself feeling very comfortable. What a public business entity is in short, and I'm really paraphrasing here. I would describe it as anybody that's dealing with SEC or filing with the SEC and other bond aspects, stuff like that. People that have public reliance on your financial reporting. The reason why I say that is we audit a good amount of broker dealers here, non-carrying broker dealers, smaller, privately held. You wouldn't think of them as a public business entity, but because they deal with the SEC, they had to adopt this last year. But for all other entities, it's periods beginning after December 15th, 2018. So that is this year. So if you're a calendar year, you have to report all this information. You have to enact this for your reporting this year. As we have in the past, we're going to have 4 code words. So if you're listening in, make sure you write down these code words, and when you send in your evaluation, please include these to ensure that you're getting your credit for the day. So I will give you the code words. The first one is going to be John, John, John. Okay. Notice it's only one word, Adam. Okay. So the first code word is John. Give you a second to write it down. If somebody stepped away from your desk, I'm going to repeat it one more time. And then we're going to move on to slides. So the first code word, just please remember the code word the first one was John. Okay, moving on. Now we start diving into more into the aspects of the 606 and the concept of control.
So the concept of control is the idea of when does the customer receive control of the good. Now, control can come in a variety of forms, and I've listed 5, and it's not all inclusive. So the customer is obligated to pay for the good or service received. So in this case, if you're doing a professional services firm and you're doing billable work and you have the right to bill for services already provided, that would be an idea of control because the customer is already receiving the good or service. The customer has legal title to the good or service. So in this case, if you, I don't know, sell a house or you sell a vehicle that has the legal title transferred over, that would be considered control. The customer has significant risk in the wards of owning the good or service. So if they have the right to sell it to someone else, or if they have the right to, they have the right to do whatever they want with the good.
Right. Yeah.
And if the good gets damaged, it's on their end. So that's another way. The customer has accepted the good or service. So just because you have a FOB shipping point and the customer hasn't accepted it doesn't mean the control. So again, just because the legal title is transferred might not necessarily mean, because it's from the customer's perspective, do they have control of the good? And that's how 606 recognizes the control of revenue. And then the customer has obtained physical possession of the good or service. So I know some of these are contradictory, but it depends on what industry you're in and what and the circumstances surrounding the contract.
And then you have a note there saying that this is not an all-inclusive list. There could be other factors, and you really have to consider that because industry and company is very specific too.
Yeah.
This is probably one of the most solidifying aspects that they try to conceptualize within 606. And it's why when Adam and I and some other people in the office discuss this, Adam really focuses on the control aspect. You're like a control freak. And I was, as you were talking, I thought of a client that I had years and years ago. I was an unfortunate person to have to go to a client in Florida in the middle of March, and I was really upset about that. And they were government contractor. They made generators that they sold mainly to the military. And one of the aspects though was somebody from the DOD or some agency had to come out and actually sign off on it that they were accepting it. So these things were completed and sitting there, and they had a FOB ready type of thing. But until the government person came out and signed for it, they weren't accepted. So I guess that's the whole control aspect in your bullet right there. The date the customer has accepted the good or service, and without that, I guess you don't have a sale.
Yeah, if you ship something different, then just because you shipped it doesn't mean it's actually a legitimate sale. You have to ship exactly what the customer ordered.
So I saw the sign off on the sheets. I'll tell you the final end of the story was I saw the sign off on the sheets, and I realized the sign off was the VP of the company. And I asked them, I said, well, why is the VP sign off? And they said, well, he went through special training that allows him to sign off for government acceptance. It wasn't a sale, by the way. The partner on the account said, yeah, that's not a good enough sale. All right, so diving into now we're going to start getting into the 5th section, and really we start bringing up some different phraseology that that came up. I'm sorry, just slip a second. That has come up in 606. Revenue, when revenue is recognized, is one of two different ways, and how it's measured we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's generally it's recognized in one of two ways. It's either recognized over time or point in time. And I guess whenever they come up with new pronouncements, they got to come up with new words, because otherwise it sounds like the old method. But they come up with, you either have to recognize over time and point in time. And to put things into clarity for people, I like to reference point in time is very similar to point of sale, not just retail industry, but point of sale. When you think about point of sale, it's when the transaction happens, it's done. That's point in time. Over time is very similar to the old like percentage of completion mentality, but it really starts focusing on many different industries, as you'll see as the examples that Adam has later on. Overtime is just pretty much like as you're earning it, you're recognizing it. But they're just, in order to recognize revenue over time, you have to meet any of these following categories, attributes. If not, then it becomes point in time. That's typical for accounting purposes. They say you either have this based on this criteria, or it defaults to the other. So to be recognized over time, the customer benefits simultaneously. The customer simultaneously receives and consumes benefit, which is, I always say, similar to control. The entity's performance creates or enhances an asset that the customer controls. Again, like that control aspect. The entity's performance does not create an asset with alternative use to the entity, and that the entity has significant enforceable right to payment for performance completed to date. So if you meet any of those criteria, you can recognize over time, but you really have to go through and review the criteria and the aspects of the contract with the client. We had a scenario where we saw like, well, I wanted to give my example because it's similar to one of your examples. If none of those three apply, then it's treated as point in time. Okay, so it's very straightforward, but the default is very straightforward. If it doesn't meet those, then it becomes point in time. But what's not straightforward is if you meet any of those three categories. Yeah. That's where a lot of our debate comes up. And what I recommend people when they're reviewing the different aspects is really be critical of these three categories, because if somebody's going to look over your information, this is where they're going to focus on. Now, the people sitting in on this will say, all right, so what? How significant is it? How important is it? But what I have found in many instances where this does come up is a couple ways, and I'll just give one example. You'll have somebody that just takes a very loose approach and says, well, this is what I think it is, and okay, it's all fine. And then all of a sudden they go through a merger and acquisition, they want to sell the company, and the buyer comes in, it's a public company, they're really focused on different aspects, and they really start beating you up on these three attributes and why you thought revenue should have been recognized. And I recommend that you put the time and effort in now to really come up with a decision as to how things are going to be treated, memorialize it in a memo, and go from there. If you need help with this aspect of it, we've worked with this a lot. We've discussed this a lot. I wouldn't say we're experts in it, but we've really gotten a good handle on it. At least different ways to look at it. Adam is more than able and willing to come out and meet with you and talk about this, or even do it over the phone as best possible.
Yeah.
The entity must evaluate all performance obligations. So all performance obligations talked in the second session, or step 2, have to be considered for the above. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was about to point out that key factor. So if you have two performance obligations, one can be overtime, one can be a point in time. So you can't just say, oh, well, the whole contract's overtime. It has to be based on the performance obligations.
That's a great point. Yeah, and it's part of your examples later on. And that's what makes this part, that's another aspect that makes this new pronouncement, this new guidance, more difficult, is that you really have to drill down further and further. So point C, we want to go on and just give a little bit more clarification. The entity's performance obligation does not create an asset with alternative use for the entity, and the entity has enforceable right of payment. In order to meet that criteria, again, it drills down a little bit further. The asset is unique to the customer. Significant costs would not be incurred to rework the asset. So if you build something and it's available to the customer, it wouldn't be significant costs if you had to rework it, if that customer wouldn't take it, or wasn't available to use it, and the asset would be sold to another customer at a significant loss. So those are things that you just have to consider when you're going through. We're accountants. We love flow charts.
Yeah.
We love trees. I think we all wanted to be IT people at some point, systems people. I think everybody at some point in their life had one of those little like rulers where you could draw these things. But if you need a flow chart or a graph to go by just to show to somebody else we gave you something, is this from one of the guides or directly from the announcement?
Yeah, this is one of the guides it was when I was doing research.
You didn't make reference here. It was in one of your memos I saw. There, in addition to the guidance, which is what, around, how many pages is the guidance that's out there?
A couple hundred.
Yeah, I want to say it's around 400 or 500 pages long. There's available resources online, which I recommend people at least download to have your availability. E&Y, Deloitte, I think KPMG has one. Those are some public resources that are available. I'm not promoting those firms or anything, but they do have public resources available. I know that one of those guides is around 1,000 pages long.
Yeah. But they put it in like a little bit easier terms to understand than the actual FASB pronouncement. So that's kind of where those things come in hand.
Right. And sometimes if you're considering, or you are part of, or you're considering working with a non-US entity that's under IFRS, some of these guides give you a comparison and contrast between GAAP and IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards. Sally hates when I only give initials. All right. Like I could say to her USA, she says, Brad, you should say United States of America.
Well, that bothers me more than the deliverable versus performance.
Oh, okay. All right. Now I know.
I say IFRS.
Oh, IFRS. I say IFRS. Oh, now I know it gets under your skin. You shouldn't tell me these things. Okay, it's 8:20, around 8:20 something. I like to keep on time as it relates to the words. So our second word is Paul. Second word is Paul. P-A-U-L. Is that, so I guess if you're from like Boston, it's Paul.
I guess.
Paul. Okay. For those that are coming back to the computer, came running back in because they heard there was a code word that they had to write down. Paul is the next one. Okay, so we've determined that there's two methods or two ways to recognize revenue. One is point in time and one is over time. In order to, point in time is usually fairly straightforward. You provided the product or the service. At that point, cut off, you recognize the revenue. Over time is more difficult because how do you determine when you should be recognizing the revenue? What attributes do you use to indicate that recognize should be revenued? And there's generally two methods that the guidance gives you that you should recognize revenue. You have the input method and the output method. And you should be picking up of one of these two. Now, you could, I imagine, you definitely could, I don't want to say imagine, you definitely could have different methods for different performance obligations.
Yes.
So it's not just it's not one type of method for the entire entity.
Yeah, you could have two overtime performance obligations. One could be input, one could be output.
Right. So you have to analyze what they are. Just giving the description. The input method is used to satisfy based on the inputs used to create the to satisfy the performance obligation. And we provide a little chart. I know that I'm not supposed to go back to old phraseology, but I like to because it puts things into perspective for people that are like older like me, that are used to the old ways and familiar with that and have it ingrained in their head. But I always attribute the input methods very similar to the cost to complete and percentage of completion. The way that was enacted or put into effect was you would determine the total cost to complete the project, or total cost to build the product. And then throughout time, you would determine how much you've incurred, how much inputs you've had, and you divide, and that's your factors to the percentage of revenue that should be recognized. So when they came out with the new pronouncement, they decided to make it a little deeper and sound a little bit more intricate, but that's the way I like to put it into perspective. The input method is based on the amount of time, energy expected to the total, amount of energy incurred to the total expected, and that's the percent to recognize. The output method, it gets a little bit, I don't want to say grayer, but I feel has different areas that it could go into. The output also determines, of course, when revenue should be recognized, but it could be measured based on different aspects. As you see here, we provided a sample list. It's not an all-inclusive list, but a sample list. It could be based on surveys, appraisals. What I see a lot more in practice now, because some public companies have been putting this out. I looked at Apple's revenue recognition, and quite comprehensive. I'm not saying that they use the next one, but I have seen it in others. But the ones that I'm seeing a lot are milestones, where within the contract you say you create certain milestones, or internally, with use of engineers or other people in the organization, you've created milestones as to how you've reached a success factor within the process. Time that's passed since the contract began. And you can't just say, okay, it's a 1-year contract and we're just going to do this, or we're just going to do this. You should usually have something else measuring it. And of course, the easy ones are like units produced or delivered, or billable amounts. So with that said, we've gone through approximately half of the session at this point. We're going to spend the next half of the session going through some examples. Anybody have any questions yet?
No? I don't see any questions.
No questions. Usually we have somebody saying about nonprofit that we're not covering it enough. Okay. So we'll dive into the examples. I'm going to give a code word in a couple minutes. Again, we'll dive into the examples. The first one I found to be very straightforward. XYZ company produces and distributes widgets for various customers. The terms for nearly all contracts are FOB shipping point. XYZ company has a product guarantee that the product will not have any defects for 18 months after purchase. And note for this example, we're assuming one performance obligation. So very straightforward. Yeah. You have one performance obligation. What about the guarantee though?
The guarantee, as we discussed in previous presentations, it falls under an assurance warranty, so it's a quality assurance rather than we're going to provide maintenance for these products after we give them to you. You
said assurance warranty, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No. And I want to make sure that people pick up on that, because as you know, you go to Tops or I'm trying to think, Crazy Eddie's. I'm picking companies that aren't around anymore because I don't want people to think that I'm promoting other companies there. And they sell warranties which are different, and there's usually insurance contracts, but they sell warranties, and those fall under 606. But the guarantees, as Adam said, for assurance of effectiveness or workingness of a product, that is something that falls under different guidance. So the question comes up: should the revenue performance obligation be recognized over time or point in time? And if you could just, there's a way to ask a question in the questions area. just put down what you think it is. I just want to see what people are saying and to make sure people are awake. And let's see, because we can see who said it. So people, wake up, people. Wake up, wake up, wake up. Chris, I got to see if this is working. You know?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So overtime or point in time? No. So what do you say, Adam? Overtime or point in time?
I'm saying point in time.
Yeah.
Because it's once it leaves the, well, ideally once it leaves the dock, and assuming everything is correct, once it leaves the dock, you're good.
Right. I said point in time also. You said if overtime, should the input method or output method be used? And the answer is not applicable.
Yeah.
Not applicable.
I just put that just in case someone thinks otherwise, but.
Right, and you put that there because otherwise, if you didn't put it there, they know it was point in time. So.
Point in time, point in time.
And I appreciate anybody giving in. I appreciate anybody giving any answers up there just because it entices us to have some conversation about this. Otherwise, it gets really boring. I'll be honest with you. What about like retail? Where do you see that that falls in?
Similar point in time. Once you pay for the goods, and you have control of the goods once you pay for them, and it's literally a point in time, point in sale transaction.
And as I said before, we do a lot of we assist a lot of retail organizations, and when I debated this topic with you and others within the organization, I tried so hard to try and find an overtime example as it relates to the retail industry, and I don't know if I could pick one up specifically relating to the sale of the goods, not warranties or anything, specifically relating to sale of goods. And I couldn't come up with one easily. If somebody has an example, I'd love to hear it, just so I could throw it back at Adam and say, you see, there was something out there. Okay, real quick, I'll give you the next code word, trying to stay on some sort of program here. The next code word is George. Okay, the next code word is George. George. If you put down JOR or GE, that's acceptable too. Okay, GORGE. Don't put GORG, that's gorge. No. No, one of the apostles wasn't George. Okay. All right. Example number 2, ABC Construction Company constructs various homes and apartments. The company has a contract to construct one apartment building and provide monthly maintenance 5 years after the construction is complete. Note for this example, we're assuming 2 performance obligations. So should the revenue be for the performance obligations be recognized overtime and point in time? And if you can give us, just throw some answers up there, what you think it is. Again, it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It's better just to have some sort of discussion going on about it. So Joe gave us overtime. So the one thing I appreciate everybody responding. The one thing I'm noticing, some people did clarify with follow-up answers. A lot of people gave one answer immediately, overtime. So Adam, and should it be input or output method? So I'm not going to ask you to type that in, but the one thing I know is people quickly said overtime, and that's the stuff that happens in our office. We'll immediately say overtime, just throw an answer out there. Well, you have to remember, and Adam put it up there, for the performance obligation. So there are 2 performance obligations, so you have to consider how do you recognize it for each performance obligation. So for construction, we feel that it's overtime. and it would use the input method. And remember, I said before, percentage of completion doesn't necessarily always apply to construction progress, but it's very similar. It would be recognized overtime as you complete it, as the customer gains
Control.
control of it.
That second bullet point.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's right where it marries up right there in
Yeah.
that second bullet point. As soon as you hit that, you know you could do overtime. And they would use, we see often that it would be input method, doesn't have to be. If they have another method that they think is more appropriate, then by all means, if they can support the other method, then use it. And then the maintenance also would be overtime. Were other people saying overtime too on maintenance? I saw somebody.
Someone said, maintenance as it's performed point in time.
That's interesting. Maintenance as it's performed, point in time. So Adam and I both felt it was overtime, but using the output method.
Yeah.
Which I thought about this a while back, and because I think about stupid things like this, I don't know why. I attributed overtime with some of the output methods equivalent to point in time. So
Yeah.
if you take almost like units produced, if you take overtime, output method, units produced, it's almost like a point in time as I'm delivering the product. So the person that answered that, and I won't say their name because they get mad if I say their name, very sensitive. I'll give them a passing grade on that one.
Yeah.
But, because at least I had a thought behind it.
And I might have my answer for it, but it might not necessarily. If you could support the other reason, then in a memo or something like that, then we can work and basically if we can come to the same conclusion based on the evidence provided. It doesn't really matter what method you use as long as it seems the most reasonable and you could support it with facts and evidence.
Right. And now the harder thing I'd say about point in time as it relates to this is it's hard to measure the good or service that is provided. And the maintenance, what I'm usually seeing is overtime based on the passage of the contract. So if it's a 12-month, I forgot what this one was. If it's a 12-month contract, we generally would be doing it. Was it 5 years? Okay, yeah. So 60 months, we would be doing 160 at the month, just based on the passage of time. That's what I would recommend to somebody, unless they can support another method. Yeah. That's what I would recommend. Okay, we have a large technology company provides software as a service. In the contract, the company will provide an annual subscription for the software, installation of the software, provide training for the customer, and provide updates during the year. Note in this example, there are performance obligations. Should the performance obligations be recognized overtime and point in time? You can give me just one of them. Just let me know what you think. Again, we ask you for this just to see that people are awake, and also to just to get some input. Now they're arguing with us about it. Anybody? Bueller? Yeah, like you saw Ferris Bueller's Day Off, right? That guy Bueller. Do you know he wrote speeches for Nixon? Ben Stein. Yeah. Installation point in time. Okay. Thank you, Lauren. See, we have these inane discussions while we're waiting for people to answer the question. So in this example, the annual subscription we've determined to be overtime based on the output method, which again is very similar to based on a passage of time. Again, I wrote a note to myself: does SaaS, software as a service, versus license make a difference? I say yes. I don't want you to say no, and then all of a sudden I'm like yes, and you're like, oh, why do you make me answer first? Because and I've seen actually a lawsuit relating to revenue recognition under the old guidance even, where a customer was doing software as a service, recognized the revenue over time, even under the old guidance, switched back to licenses so they could recognize the revenue immediately. Yeah, so it was SEC related.
Yeah.
And I've actually seen 2 lawsuits in this matter recently, not on any of our clients. It was outside. I was reading up on it. So annual subscription is overtime. The installation, I think Lauren even said the installation is point in time. I agree. It's as a service or good is provided. The training, again, point in time, and both of those are NA for the method. And then the updates is overtime is if you can put a value on the updates.
Well, that would be step 4.
Right. And I'm actually going back to step 2. Is should that be a performance obligation? But you said at the outset it's
Yeah.
4 performance obligations. That's why I say step 2 is one of the harder ones, because you and I would sit there and debate if it's 3 or 4 performance
Yeah.
obligations. Okay. The last example, a prestigious boarding school provides an education to middle and high school students. And I've been bothered because this is the second time we've done this example, because I'm concerned, is it only prestigious boarding schools that provide excellent education, or anyway? In addition to the excellent education, the school requires all students to live on campus, which is included in the tuition costs. Lastly, there's a club fee, which is charged to the students on an annual basis. Note for this example, we're assuming 3 performance obligations. Should the revenue be recognized over time or point in time, and then the method that should be used. Anybody? If you type it in, there we go.
All overtime.
Okay.
Tuition overtime. Tuition input, club fee overtime.
Okay, so what we felt was, as I think Lauren said, yeah, all of them are overtime. We agree with that. I vacillated at first, and I in all honesty, Adam had pulled together the slides, and I read through these, answering the questions as I went along, and then I compared my notes just to see, where our perspective was. And I started with club fee, and I was torn on that one a little bit, because I was thinking not about refundability, but more, when is the club meeting? Is it meeting at just the beginning of the year? Is it the whole year? And there's certain aspects. I was diving a little bit too deep into it.
Like typically you pay like a club fee, and the fund goes to like a whole pool of funds, and it's distributed to the various clubs, so you can join whatever club you want. And so it's just like a general fund that everybody pays into. So you don't necessarily have to join the club, but everyone has to pay for it.
So you must know, because you went to a prestigious boarding school in Montville. I didn't go to a prestigious boarding school.
I went to public school, so.
I know you did. So yeah, you're right. When I thought about it afterwards, I agreed, but that's the whole aspect of it, is trying to get this all through your head. And then the output, we've determined that it was the output method. I think somebody said input method for one of them, and it could be. I think somebody said input method for tuition.
I would say it's more passage of time.
Yeah, that's what I would go with. I don't know. And you audit a lot of schools, so I defer to your judgment with that one.
Well, I mean, the key is, there's a lot of, on an annual basis, you're not gonna see anything tricky with revenue recognition, because 1 year's passed, and all the tuition related to that fiscal year, for that school year or fiscal year, is in that year, and it's whatever was prepaid for the next year is deferred. So that's where like the only break is on an annual basis, but I can see if you're looking at an interim basis, like what's the revenue for Q1, Q2, or half year, or however you.
Right. And for a large part with tuition, I know there can be different changes, but for a large part, the cost model or cost aspects don't, and I'm focusing on costs as the input denominator. the cost aspects don't generally change that much. Because if you have, 50 students, you're gonna have a cost aspect. If you have 51 or 52 students, there's not a significant change to the cost aspect. That is gonna vary. And that's why I would probably go similar in the output is passage of time. Okay, we're gonna roll through a couple disclosures and then I'll give you the last code word. ASC 606 requires significant enhancement to disclosures, and we're talking significant enhancements. We had said over in the past, I had a client that I emailed that we're doing this presentation, and they said to me, it doesn't apply. I wasn't taking it personally. They said it just doesn't apply. And the 4 hours of seminars I sat through last week, we were all in the same. We all had the same opinion that we probably feel that the accounting for 606, your accounting treatment will probably affect 10% of the companies. The disclosure aspects will probably affect 90% of the companies, and the documentation aspect will affect 100% of the companies. So for that person to say it just doesn't apply outright, I just can't say how wrong they were with this. So the disclosures, it is going to affect a lot of people. I mean, I know that Chris in our office was doing a lot of research on the retail industry, and he's been looking at public company financial statements, and he has them, at his disposal to see what, type of disclosure is going to be required to be made. Now, for public companies, the disclosure is a lot more intensive as it relates to quantitative aspects. Private companies have a lot more qualitative aspects, particularly as it relates to disaggregation of revenue between the overtime and point in time, contract balances, remaining performance obligations, significant judgments. Everybody years ago wanted us to go to IFRS or IFRS, doesn't matter, and because they said it was easier. What people didn't realize is that GAAP financial statements, they did an analysis one time, and they looked at a set of financial statements performed under GAAP versus IFRS. The GAAP financial statements were around 50 pages. The IFRS or IFRS financial statements were 73. All disclosure oriented and significant judgments, etc. Overtime or point in time disclosure should include when a company typically satisfies the performance obligations. The revenues must be presented disaggregate, how the control goods or services are transferred. So what's important here is what we're saying is that you have to disaggregate your point in time, and it could be done in the footnotes, not on the face of the income statement. Your point in time revenue versus your overtime revenue, how the performance obligations are satisfied over time, the method used, and how the method is applied. So with that said, we went through this pretty quick with our witty banter, and tried to give you just some insight into 606. We strongly recommend that you look into this more. If you have questions, by all means reach out to us. Adam is really conversant in this area, has done a lot of research on this, and is happy to talk to anybody in addition to any of the service providers at Solon Company. Our next session is going to be on going concern, and because it has significant impact on the companies, not just the orders, on the companies. So we're going to do going concern probably on December 12th. I have to verify that we have the IT and the room available. So watch for something to come out on that. I'm asking for anybody that's in attendance or anybody to ask them to attend. If you have any topics that you'd like to hear about, I'm more than happy to pull together a presentation for you. This is one of Adam's specialty areas, so I don't know if he will be joining me again, and actually I'm kind of tired of him stealing the spotlight. Now, I enjoyed speaking with Adam, and I hope he joins me again on future presentations. And I will now give you the last code word and see if there are any questions. So the last code word, I've watched Adam go through Googling the 12 apostles, the monarchy, and it's pretty simple. The last one is Ringo, Ringo. So it goes to show that this millennial and Gen Z does not know what John, Paul, George, and Ringo are. Okay? So the last one is Ringo, Ringo. And for those that don't know, those are the four Beatles. Okay? You didn't pick up on it. But they said this is the first generation that doesn't know the four Beatles names. That's always important to 606, by the way. Does anybody have any final questions? If not, it is past the 50-minute mark. And at that point, no other questions?
No.
No?
Thank
At
you.
that
Have a
point,
great day.
I say thank you, Adam.
What?
No, I was gonna, so do you want to sign off?
Thanks everybody for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you too.
Stop. Okay.
Okay. Great job, Adam. What?
I tell you every Taylor Swift song now. How do you not know the Beatles' names? When did you pick up on it though? After George. George. Yeah. George. I figured Paul.
Yeah.
At your age, I figured.
It all sounds like English names, and I was like,
Yeah, I didn't know what well, first John, like, was he just doing names from The Office?
Yeah.
And then Paul too.
oh, I was like,
And then you went George, and I was like, oh.
we don't have a George. Well, we do have a George, but it's not.
Oh, yeah.
But I did say you could go Jorge.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. Nice job.
You don't know, dude. We were looking at the list and you weren't on,
Yeah.
and I said to me, somebody go get Chris, please.
How many people are on the?
Oh, really?
Yeah. You gotta get people.
And two more from here.
No. There was.
Oh, three others.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we gotta get other people signed up. I mean, I don't mind doing this and recording it,
Well, how are we promoting that thing really though? I
Well,
mean,
that's-
send out a mailer and then.
and I think that we've gotta tell our clients, like, you've gotta tell your
Yeah.
clients, but what? I know you've told Ben, who should
Shmuley.
be listening. You told Shmuley though?
At one point I did, I don't know if I told you the specific one.
And I think we gotta start going out to people more hard pressed on this. Like, the one, Ken Brown, I told Adam that he did this, Ken Brown, I said, Ken, you wanna listen to this? He wants CPE,
Right.
it's free, he doesn't have to leave his desk, okay?
Doesn't apply then, is that the one?
And it's when he
Yeah.
doesn't apply. Yeah, I met a guy last night, at William Patterson, I'm on the mentoring thing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, I meant that guy that you mentor. I forgot to tell you that at the,
Yeah,
The-
Nazareth.
yeah.
He took your product show, yeah, he's a little quirky,
Yeah.
yeah. a little
He
quirky.
came back like 3 times to talk to me at that meet and greet thing.
What the mentoring is not supposed to be about is getting you a job at
Yeah.
our organization. That's not what it's supposed to be about.
Right.
It's advising, and that's one thing I'm noticing. It's a little annoying, but one thing I found weird about him is he gets very mad.
Really?
Like he'll talk.